A guten Erev Shabbos and a guten Chodesh. Today is Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and tomorrow will be Rosh Chodesh as well. And tonight and tomorrow, of course, is Shabbos. Normally on this Shabbos, we would be reading two Parshios, Tazria and Metzora. And it's interesting to take note of one of the supernatural plagues that would take place when the Jewish people would enter into the Promised Land. And that plague is called Nigei Habayis, an affliction upon a home. If a discoloration would appear on the walls of a house without any rational explanation, there's a whole procedure which needs to be followed. All of the utensils would be emptied, including the furniture, and a kohen would come, he would examine it, and sometimes it would be quarantined, and other times, ultimately, it would be pronounced as tameh, and you would have to remove the pieces of the wall that have this discoloration. What is behind all of this? Well, there are two interpretations that are given by way of explanation to explain what this was all about. The very well-known one is Rashi, who quotes the Torah's Kohanim and says that actually this was a good thing. What was good about it? Well, the Canaanite nations used to hide their valuables inside the walls of their homes. And by virtue of having to remove, let's say, the bricks of the stone wall, they would discover these treasures of gold and silver and gems. And so this was a good thing happening to the Jewish people, because this way they would become quite wealthy with the discovery of all of this abandoned wealth. There's another interpretation that actually suggests that it is in a form of a punishment, because it was done to a person who didn't behave properly. Namely, he had a neighbor who came and asked to borrow something. Let us say it was a hammer. And his neighbor said, "I need a hammer. Can I borrow your hammer?" And the person didn't want to lend him the hammer. And so he lied, and he said he doesn't have a hammer. Well, later on, when this would happen, and he has to take out all the utensils from his home, he would be discovered as being a liar, because everyone would see he did have a hammer. And so therefore this came in the form of a punishment for being too selfish, for not thinking about somebody else's needs and thinking only about himself. So it's interesting that you have two very diametrically opposite types of interpretations here, because on the one hand, discovering a treasure would appear to be a reward. On the other hand, you have actually something that's in the form of a punishment. So that in and of itself is already unusual, relatively speaking, to find such diametrically opposite interpretations. But in addition to that, it would seem to be puzzling that the very fact that you have this called a nega, an affliction, would itself raise a question. Why would you call this a nega when in fact it is something that ultimately rewards the person and makes him wealthy? That's not a nega, that's not an affliction or a plague. It's something good. Perhaps we could suggest the following. Both of them have a common denominator, both interpretations. The common denominator is that a perspective needs to be changed. So, let's take a look at the one who refused to lend somebody his hammer. Why did he decline to lend a hammer to a neighbor? Well, he could justify it for many reasons. Oh, the neighbor is going to lose it. I'll never get it back. Oh, the neighbor will break it. Oh, the neighbor won't keep the terms if I tell him I can lend it to him for a day, but I need it back tomorrow. And therefore he lied and said he doesn't have one. But that isn't good enough. And he needs to change his perspective. And he needs to think about the needs of others, not just the needs of his own. And so that's really what's behind the punishment, if you wish, to change his perspective. And the same also for a person who has a nigei habayis following the interpretation of it being ultimately a discovery of a treasure. You need to look at internally, not just look outside your home. Look internally and see how many great treasures you have in your home. Why does a person oftentimes want more than what he has? As Chazal say, Yesh lo mana rotze Messiah. He has 100, but he wants 200. Why isn't the 100 good enough for him? Well, because he looks outside his home, and he looks at other people. And he looks at other people, let's say when he goes to work and he sees people driving nicer cars than what he has. He sees people dressing in a way that reflects the wealth that they might have, or the jewelry they might be wearing, or whatever it is that a person might look at and therefore be jealous of. And that's what the Torah wants you to be thinking about. Perhaps your perspective needs to be corrected. It's not only what is outside the home that's important, and maybe not even that important. Look at the treasures internally. Look at what you have inside your home. Discover that treasure. Correct your perspective. There's a story that is told, and I want to make it clear that I don't think it's a story that has a original holy source to it. I once asked my father, Zichrono Livracha, about this story, which I'll share with you shortly. And he said, it's not a story from Chazal, not from our Torah sages, but it's a story that was told in Jewish circles. I'm grateful to my niece, Batya Unger, who says that the earliest source that she could find for it is in the book 1001 Tales of Arabian Nights. And again, that is an anthology of a collection of many tales, but it's not from a Jewish source. There are many sources that are actually collections collected in that particular book. But regardless of the original source for this story, it has an interesting moral. The story is about a Jew who had a dream night after night after night about a treasure being underneath a bridge that crossed over a moat that led to the castle of a king that lived in far away. And finally, after having the dream on so many consecutive nights, he decided that he had to take it seriously. And so he went and he traveled to where that king lived. And when he came there, the castle and the bridge looked exactly as it looked in his dream. But it was also being patrolled by guards, and there were many sentries there. So there was no way that he could go and start digging underneath the bridge to find the treasure. And so finally, after spending some time and not finding any other solution, he decides that perhaps what he should do is go and partner with one of the guards. So he approaches one of the sentries and he shares with him the dream that he had. And he tells him about the dream and that there's a treasure here underneath the bridge, and if he'll allow him to dig at night when no one will be watching, he'll give him a portion of that treasure. And the guard laughs at him and he says, what are you being silly? I've been having a dream now for a long time about some Jew in some forsaken town, and he describes the name of the town and the name of the Jew where he lives, and then he has a treasure in his home, and it's in his backyard underneath a tree. And you think I'm going to follow my dream and go travel to that place and start digging underneath this tree? And so the Jew leaves, goes home, and he finds the treasure indeed in his backyard underneath the tree, as was told to him by the guard at the palace. And of course, the moral of the story is that there are times when you have to travel very far and go through many experiences only to find out that the treasure was always there in your home all along. We have so many treasures in our homes. We should be grateful for so many things. And perhaps at this time when we are by and large almost totally confined to our homes, maybe we will be discovering some of these treasures. Think about it. We wake up in the morning. We woke up. And we're encouraged to say Moda Ani because we woke up. That's because not everybody wakes up. There are people who don't wake up. There are people that we can't even wake them up. They're in a coma. So if we woke up from a sleep, we should be grateful for it and say Moda Ani. We can get out of bed. We can walk. We should make a bracha for that. And we do. Hamechim mitzadei gaver. It's one of the brachas that we make early in the davening. If we use the bathroom and everything functions properly, we should see that as being a wonderful gift from the Almighty. The internal plumbing is working. That's great. That's fantastic. More than one doctor has told me how they feel that bracha of Ashayatza is one of the most magnificent brachas ever composed. It's a great blessing, and what a treasure it is to have it working properly. And there are so many treasures like that we should be grateful for, that we can find in our homes. And when we stop looking beyond our homes, when we stop looking at others, and we might define for ourselves what's really to be treasured and the very treasures that we have in our home. So it is a nega. It's a nega in the sense that it's a punishment to go through the relative inconvenience of having to remove everything from the house and to remove even bricks from the wall. But ultimately, we discover a treasure that was there all along. And that's the perspective that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to correct. Look internally and discover all the treasures that you have in such a way that hopefully makes it all the more meaningful for you, and appreciate all that you have in the bountiful blessings from the Almighty. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu grant that we have these perspectives, perspective of being more generous and not being selfish, and at the same time also looking deep internally in our homes to be able to see the treasures that we have, the wonderful families that we have, all of the wealth and comforts that we enjoy, and we should appreciate them for what they are. And as a result, our own perspectives will be more generous, more giving, and hopefully more blessed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Have a wonderful Shabbos and a good Chodesh.